Hello, James.
Hey, Donna, how are you?
I'm fine. And James, it's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise.
So, Satyajit Ray, let's start with an introduction to the listening audience before we start talking about some of the films.
Sure. He's widely considered one of the greatest filmmakers of the post-war period, certainly the greatest filmmaker from India. He was from Calcutta, born in Calcutta, from a very auspicious family who were involved with the arts, going many generations back. He had a great interest in cinema from the very beginning. He started a film society called the Calcutta Film Society in 1947. But he became especially interested in filmmaking for two reasons. One was that Jean Renoir, the French filmmaker, came to India to make his film The River. And Satyajit Ray helped him scout locations, and he told Renoir about his desire to make a film out of this very well-known book, Pather Panchali, and Renoir encouraged him to do so. And also, a second thing that inspired him was he was a graphic designer for a British advertising company, and he was sent to London for a brief spell to the head office. And while he was there, he went to the cinema as often as he could. In fact, he later said that he watched 99 films. It seems like he kept a very precise count during that spell in London. And the revelation for him there was seeing Vittorio De Sica's neorealist classic, The Bicycle Thieves. Now, of course, this film has inspired countless other directors in the world, and Satyajit Ray took the lessons from it when he went back to India and decided that he was going to set out and make Pather Panchali. Because, for instance, one of the things that he was determined to do was to use everyday people in his cinema, not actors from the studio system. He searched out amateur actors, and that is one of the great revolutions that he brought to Indian cinema.
Pather Panchali is where I started with Satyajit Ray, and I can understand why he wanted to use real people, because the little boy in the film is so incredible.
Well, you know, this is one of the things about Ray's cinema, is that there are many masterpieces about the world of women, but there's so many great films as well about the world of children. He seemed to have this sort of preternatural connection with children, and he was always interested in children's literature. His grandfather had started a children's magazine called Sandesh, and Ray actually carried this tradition on. He funded the magazine. He did all the writing in it, etc. He just absolutely loved the world of children, and you see this time and again. He's a fantastic director of child actors. Pather Panchali being a prime example, of course, but also this amazing little film that he made in the 80s called Piku, about a boy sort of watching the adult world and seeing all of the betrayals, etc., that the world of his parents. And all the way through his cinema, you get these incredible performances. And he actually made a series of films for children, all of which are in the retrospective. Like any great children's cinema, they are very enjoyable for adults as well. But his most commercially successful film, in fact, was one of his children's films, The Adventures of Guppy and Bagda.
Oh, okay. So there's so much in this retrospective. How did you go about choosing some of these films?
Well, you know, I actually didn't choose because, I hate to say, because I'm supposed to be curating this, but it's a more or less comprehensive retrospective. There's very little that Ray made that is not in it. I've done 2 other retrospectives of his cinema, but what really propelled us to do it this time was the fact that much of his work has been restored. And there are a whole raft of new restorations that were done both in the United States, in California, and in India that we are able to include this time. Now, why this is so important is that in 1992, when the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in Los Angeles decided to give him their honorary Lifetime Achievement Award and the Oscars, they discovered when they were looking for material to illustrate it, footage from his films, they discovered that most of his films, including many of his masterpieces, were in very dire situation. There were very few good elements to work from. Some lab fires had destroyed negatives, etc., etc. So this great body of work, this great legacy was at risk. And so the Academy decided quite heroically to undertake to restore all of his work. And they've been at it now for, a few decades. And we did show some of the restorations in the past, but a whole lot of new ones have been done since. And the archivist from the Academy will be coming to give some talks about the whole nature of that project.
Well, I'm so happy that was done. My introduction to Satyajit Ray came in 1992 when I was watching the Oscars, and he was getting this award in his hospital bed, and I thought, who is this director that everybody is going crazy over? And so I had to do some, research and find out. And then TIFF showed, you mentioned the previous retrospective, and I went then and saw the Apu trilogy, and was absolutely blown away.
Yeah, this is one of the most famous trilogies in the history of world cinema, and justifiably so. It took him 3 years to make Pather Panchali, the first film in the trilogy, which is about the life. It's sort of what they called a Bildungsroman, the lifespan of a young man from child to, in the final film, The World of Apu, getting married and undergoing various tragedies. But it took him 3 years to make Pather Panchali, partly because he had funding problems and partly because he kept refusing funding from anybody who wanted to control the film in any way. For instance, there was an organization who would have given him money if he had written a happy ending, and he absolutely refused it. He managed to fund it on his own. And of course, that film established his worldwide fame. It won many awards and was critically acclaimed around the world. And then he went on to make Aparajito, the second film, which is about the relationship between Apu and his mother. This is my personal favorite of the trilogy. Not that one wants to be invidious and pick favorites, but it's the one that's the least known, and to me it's the one that's the most emotionally overwhelming. It always destroys me, that film.
It's devastating, but it's so good to watch.
Oh, it is. It's fantastic. And then it was, I forget who it was who actually encouraged him to finish it as a trilogy. He hadn't planned to make it as a trilogy initially. And he thought, okay, I will bring him through to the age of marriage. And then we get to The World of Apu, which is the finish of the trilogy. But, he made other trilogies later in his career, which, of course, are far less well known. And there's so many misconceptions about Satyajit Ray. I don't know if this is an apocryphal tale, but I have read that Francois Truffaut, when he saw Pather Panchali, said, "I don't want to watch a film about peasants eating with their hands." Why I question whether this is a true story or not is because later Truffaut came to admire Ray's cinema a great deal, and Ray, in fact, was influenced by Truffaut's films. But to go back to the thing of trilogies, he did make a later film, a set of 3 films in his home city of Calcutta, which are very they're very satirical, they're somewhat angry films, they're somewhat experimental in their form, because he had been influenced a little bit by the French New Wave by then. And because he was always being accused of various things. He was being accused of making too many films about poverty, which is not true. If you look at his entire filmography, there's only actually a handful of films that deal with the poor. Many of them are set in the intelligentsia and the upper classes, the middle classes of Calcutta. He was accused of being apolitical, which is also not true. If you look at a number of his films, he very much takes on the politics of India, and particularly in the very last trilogy he made. When you talk about seeing him in his hospital bed on the Oscar telecast, it was because he had had a very severe heart attack 9 or 10 years before that, which greatly limited what he could do physically. And so this final trilogy of films that he made is they're all set indoors, which is very unlike his other cinema. When you think of films like Days and Nights in the Forest or Kanchenjunga, which are set in wonderful rural holiday settings in the Himalayas, etc. But these last three films are all set indoors, and they're very angry films. You think of somebody that age, you think that they might turn serene. It was the opposite with Satyajit Ray. He was very disillusioned with what was happening to India. He saw that for him, the country was losing its values and was becoming very corrupt. And so this final trilogy of films, which consists of An Enemy of the People, which is based on the famous Ibsen play, Branches of the Tree, and The Stranger, he really took on what he felt was the corroding nature of his country.
Now, you mentioned the world. We've talked a bit about the world of children.
Yes.
Can you move now to the world of women?
Yeah, this is another hallmark of his cinema. His is incredibly, and he got tired of people telling him how the hallmarks of his cinema were understatement and subtlety and gentle irony. He actually began to mock that kind of thing as if it was expected of him. Because again, it's absolutely true. Those are the qualities that one thinks of immediately when you think of Ray's cinema. But there are other elements. You find Gothic elements. People forget that he actually went to Hollywood at one point to make a film with, of all people, Peter Sellers and Marlon Brando. There are all kinds of very surprising things about Ray, but you ask about the world of women. A number of his greatest films, I think, are women-centered. Two of the ones that I can think of immediately are Devi, the Goddess, about a young woman who her father-in-law becomes obsessed with the idea that she is an incarnation of this goddess, and essentially drives her mad through trying to make her into this goddess. The other film is, of course, Charlotta. I think the English title is The Lonely Wife, and that says it all. It's about a young woman whose husband is so wrapped up in his newspaper work that she becomes she feels adrift and very lonely, and she is befriended by this other young man, etc. And Ray considered this perhaps quite rightly as his best film. He was asked. He was a perfectionist, and he often looked back on his films and said, "Oh, I wish I'd done it this way," or "I wish I'd done this differently," etc. Charlotta for him was the film that he said that he would change nothing. He would make it exactly the same way that he made before. And the fortunate thing that in the retrospective is we have a wonderful Ray scholar to introduce that particular film, Charlotta, on July 11th, Kathleen O'Connell from the University of Toronto.
I've never seen any of his short films, and it's wonderful that TIFF Cinematheque is showing some of these films.
Yeah, we've brought together a program of them. There are a few that are showing with the features, but primarily there's a program of four of them, The Inner Eye, Bala, Sikkim, and Two, on July 15th. And yeah, they are extremely, extremely rare. One of the things I'm happiest about in terms of the restorations is the film that immediately follows that program of shorts. It's called Three Daughters. And I think that this is going to be confusing to some people who know their Satyajit Ray, because for decades and decades and decades we've been seeing a film called Two Daughters, which people like Pauline Kael, the famous film critic who loved Satyajit Ray's cinema, was a great champion of Ray's cinema. This was her favorite of his films. She praised it to the skies. I think she said that it was Ray at his most splendid. Anyway, it is it's again a collection of short films in the sense that there's three short narratives, and the one was always missing. When it was released to the world, they removed one of the middle films, which is sort of a horror film. Oddly enough, you could never imagine, again, I go back to the preconceptions about Satyajit Ray, but he actually made a horror film, which is called The Lost Jewels. It's a very macabre tale about a search for treasure, and that now has been restored to the middle sequence of that film, which is now known as Three Daughters.
It seems like he's one of these directors who, people accuse him. You mentioned, you make two films about poverty, and then, no, you make films about the middle class. It's like, your films are too Western, your films are too Indian.
He truly, it was a case of, he just couldn't win. Critics at home said, you're showing the bad side of India to the world, essentially that old line that you often hear in various cultures about, dirty laundry. And in fact, there was a famous instance where a parliamentarian who was an actress originally, I believe, who'd been elected to the Indian Parliament, accused him of showing the bad side of India to the rest of the world, not showing the new, modern, industrial India, which is simply not true. When you look at the films that he made in Calcutta, films like Mahanagar and The Middleman, etc., etc., these are they show, modern, all of the tensions in modern India. And then, obversely, when I say he couldn't win, there were the Western critics who, because they had, initially encountered his work through the Apu trilogy, expected that kind of filmmaking. And so whenever he deviated from it, when the films were set in Calcutta amongst the intelligentsia, et cetera, they felt a bit betrayed because it wasn't the Satyajit Ray that they knew and loved. So, he often was accused also at home, for instance, by the filmmaker Mrinal Sen, whose films I greatly, greatly admire. Now, there's somebody who deserves a retrospective. But he also came from the same tradition of the Bengali art house cinema. But he was much more to the left politically than Satyajit Ray, and he was a Marxist, in fact, and he accused Ray of totally ignoring politics, and in fact used the fact that Ray had once used a matinee idol, a Bollywood matinee idol, in one of his films, and essentially used that as evidence that Ray was a sellout.
He can't win, but he does win in the end, because the title of this retrospective comes from a quote by Akira Kurosawa.
Yeah, it's a lovely quote. It was a mutual admiration society there. That you can see the qualities, the affinities between their cinemas for sure. But Kurosawa said not to have seen the films of Ray would mean existing in a world without the sun or the moon. And what lovelier tribute could there be from one artist to another? But you think of all of the filmmakers after Ray who have admired his work, who've been influenced by him. Some of them are somewhat unlikely, Martin Scorsese being one of them. Scorsese has always championed Ray cinema. In fact, his organization, the Film Foundation, which their sole purpose, or their main purpose, is to restore classics of world cinema, in many cases films that are not well known. They have also participated in this whole project of restoring Ray cinema.
There's a sidebar to this as well. Did you have any input into the sidebar?
No, the sidebar was my idea.
Okay.
It's a series I have always wanted to do on its own, and I took the opportunity of the Satyajit Ray retrospective, partly because, when you think about it, how did he become a filmmaker? It was through the inspiration of a Western filmmaker, Jean Renoir, who had come to India to make this film, The River, which I deeply love, based on a Ruth Godden novel. And so there you get the idea of an outsider coming to India to make a film that reflects many aspects of Indian culture. And I started to think, well, this has been a tradition from the silent era, in fact. The French, there are a number of French silent films, documentaries especially, about India. So there's always been this fascination in Western filmmakers with India, who use the country in many different ways, and I thought it would be very interesting to take a look at a select group of them. I avoided the whole sort of British imperialist approach to India, because I think that we've seen those films many, many times. I focused more on especially French filmmakers who've gone to India. Louis Malle being the most famous example, who made this epic documentary, Phantom India, which I recently rewatched to write my notes for the series, and boy, is that a provocative film, and it's shocking in many ways, his perceptions of India. But also Roberto Rossellini's great film about India. There's a very influential, very meditative documentary by an American filmmaker that is going to be introduced by... The idea for the series came partly out of a book that I participated in. I contributed an essay on a French film called Nocturne Indien by Alain Corneau. This young film curator and art curator who is taking his degree in London and spends much of his time in his native Mumbai, did this fantastic volume of essays called Outsider Films on India, I believe it's called. It's beautifully designed. It's one of the most beautifully designed books I've ever seen, actually. And what he did is he commissioned essays from various film scholars and historians and critics about these films. And, most of the essays, including my own, are very critical of these films. Because, of course, there is this tendency when filmmakers like Fritz Lang or Jean Renoir or Alain Corneau, Benoît Jacot, who has a film in the series called L'Intouchable, The Untouchable. There is this, what Edward Said, of course, called, named in his famous book, Orientalism, this projection onto India of various ideas of exoticism and mysticism and darkness and peril and all of these things. And so this series is sort of sets out to take a look at that whole tendency of filmmakers, and it includes two films that I find fascinating because they're set in India and they evoke India, but they never went to India to film them. They were done totally in studio elsewhere, and that's Michael Powell's very delirious film Black Narcissus, and Marguerite Duras' film India Song, which she filmed in a villa in France. So both of these are completely studio set, very artificial films.
What about the Tiger of Eshnapur?
Yeah, this is Fritz Lang's Indian epic that he shot partly in studio and partly in India. This is the most delirious example of pure, full-out Orientalism that you get in this series. It's a two-part film. It's 200 minutes. We're showing them on the same night, the Tiger of Eshnapur and the Indian Tomb, and it's this wildly hyper-designed, very expressionistic, dreamlike evocation of India. And it's about a German, I think it's an architect, if I remember correctly, who's sent to India, and all of these adventures and misadventures that befall him in the country.
With Deborah Paget.
Deborah Paget, the ineffable Deborah Paget.
James, will you be introducing any of these films?
No, I won't. But consider yourself lucky. No, but we have a number of introductions. Shanae Javeri, who is the young curator I mentioned before, who had edited this book on outsider films, will be coming from London to introduce two of the films in the sidebar, L'Intouchable and Forest of Bliss, another very controversial vision of India, a documentary by Robert Gardner. And that's it for the sidebar. I mentioned that the other is Kathleen O'Connell introducing Charlotta.
Okay, well, there's certainly a lot to take in. And where do you think people should start, James?
You know, it's a cliche, but it's why we're beginning the series with the Apu trilogy. It's the most accessible way. It is the most emotionally accessible way. You're introduced to his world. You know, one of the things that all of the hallmarks of Ray are in those films, his humanism, the subtlety of his camera movement. You know, he was one of these directors who drew to himself a troupe of actors. You'll see one of the great pleasures of Ray cinema, as with, you know, Fassbinder and, you know, other directors like that. You see the same actors over and over again. In fact, through the course of the retrospective, you could watch some of these actors actually grow up in his cinema. You know, actors like Sumitra Chatterjee and Sharmila Tagore. And he also worked with, you know, the same art director over and over again, the same cinematographer, Subrata Mitra. And so all of the, you know, a lot of these things are introduced in the Apu trilogy. And the elaboration of those themes, you know, the portrait of the mother in Aparajito, you know, that prepares you for the later portraits of women, which are so, you know, rich and subtle. The world of children, obviously, from Pather Panchali, and then you get, you know, in the world of Apu, he's you know, yearning to go to school, and you know, a number of Ray's later great films deal with young university students and intelligentsia. You know, Days and Nights in the Forest being the prime example of that. So everything is right there in that trilogy, but I would just hope that people don't just go to the trilogy and feel, you know, I know my Ray, you know, have, because the later films, and he was great right to the very end.
Okay, so we'll have them start there. And James, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Donna.
All right, you have a good afternoon now.
I plan to.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye. And that was James Quandt. He is the senior programmer at TIFF Cinematheque. And as James recommended, start with Pather Panchali and move on to some of the other films in this retrospective. And there's many to choose from, as you've heard James saying. You're listening to CIUT 89.5 FM, The More the Merrier, with Donna G.
Right here, right now, every day. CIUT 89.5, the sound of your city.
You're listening to CIUT 89.5 FM. This is Donna G. And joining me by telephone right now is nurse and comedian, yes, nurse and comedian, Zabrina Chevannes. And she has a show, A Nurse's Worst Nightmare, coming up July 6th at the Comedy Bar. And I want to welcome her back to the show, but it's been a very long time. Hello, Zabrina.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, and good to reconnect.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's been a really long time, actually.
So I mentioned you that you're a nurse and a comedian. What came first?
Nursing, for sure. And then nursing is such a difficult job. Like, we always, especially in the medical profession, we always need an outlet. So comedy came next. I was personally, you know, telling jokes with friends, but then taking the stage was like way into my nursing career. So, oh yeah.
Okay. So how are your kids dealing with the transition? I know they were very young when I first interviewed you. How are they doing now?
They're funny. They were very young. They were like, my son was like a few months, and my daughter was like 2 at the time. But they knew I was doing stand-up. I didn't even tell them. They would get, like, my daughter would get on a box, and you know how kids laugh at stupid things? She's like, poo-poo, and then my son would be like, ah, laughing. And I'm like, oh, my God, she's doing a stand-up set. She knows already. But, yeah, they love the fact that I do stand-up. But they tell, like, people in inappropriate situations. They'll be like, oh, at the bank, they'll be like, my mom's a comedian. And they're like, okay, here's your, like, what is happening? Yeah, but, yeah, my daughter's always telling jokes all the time.
So this show coming up, A Nurse's Worst Nightmare, conceived by you, right?
Oh, yeah. It's basically, I'm working on a one-woman show, and I'm actually going to put everything together at one, as one that night. And I have, like, 3 other, like, award-winning comedians and a storyteller that's also going to be on the show. So it's basically, it's going to be funny, but it's basically a true story of like some of the crazy things that I've been through in my life in terms of like mental illness, in terms of like dealing with death, but like it's a different like a comedy perspective, if you can imagine that. But it's hard to imagine, but it's actually just destigmatizing some of the things that we don't like to talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that's what I'm pretty much doing with this one-woman show that I'm creating.
So you have some help you mentioned. Tell me about the other featured comedians.
Well, we have Paul Hutchinson. He's amazing. He's been around the scene for years, but he's been mostly doing his own solo shows. Like, he does a lot of solo shows. He's actually toured all over the States and won like numerous awards for his one-man shows. And then Sandra Battaglini, she's an amazing comedian around Toronto right now. A lot of people know her. She's so good. And then Morgan Phillips, he's actually a paramedic, and he does a lot of medical stories, but they're funny, but they're like really crazy if you're not in the medical field. But they're yeah, but he's sort of like me. Like, I've met him before, and I watched his stories. He talks about, like, you know, being a paramedic and going on those crazy calls. And some of them are so insane, even for me, but he's so good. So he's going to be on the show as well. So if the tickets are $10, it's definitely more than your money's worth.
Now, the Charlevoix Post says it's a journey through your childhood in a Jamaican family with an autistic sister to a nurse's darkest time. Yeah. So tell me more.
Well, basically, it's just different. Lived with my sister, like, for so many years, up until a point where she was in a group home. But the way my family dealt with her being autistic, and then how, because she was our older sister, me and my two brothers sort of mimicked some of the things that she did, which wasn't good. But my dad, he didn't know really how to deal with it, and he was totally inappropriate. So, like, it's really funny, but it's like, every time, like, I would talk about it, I'll always have audience members coming up to me, like, telling me, like, oh my gosh, like, I have a brother or a sister who's autistic as well, and yeah, that same stuff happened to me. And it's like you think it would be inappropriate, but people totally relate to that stuff. And then, like, me being a nurse and taking care of really sick people with mental illness up until my marriage, and then how my husband developed a mental illness and going through that dark moment. But, like, it's so interesting how there's such a stigma on mental illness, and people are afraid to talk about it, to the point where when I talk about it, people will come up to me afterwards, like, thank you, telling me thank you for talking about it. And it was so funny, but it was so real. And I'm like, that really inspires me to do something like this.
Yeah, and, you know, many people don't talk about mental illness, but Jamaicans, I don't see them out there, you know, sharing.
Oh, no. My parents are just like, don't tell anybody your business.
Exactly.
Sure. They would tell me when I was a kid, don't tell nobody about your sister, even though we're in the street, she has a helmet on, everybody can see her. There's like, don't tell no one. Oh yeah, it's totally, especially in the Caribbean community. You can't talk about none like your business, especially on stage. No way.
I know.
Yeah, so this is going to be something totally different for sure.
Has your family ever seen your shows?
Oh yeah, my dad watches it. My dad's seen my shows so many times. My parents are hilarious, so they're, like, so supportive. My dad's always trying to give me jokes, though. He's like, you're going to do some comedy? Tell them the one. How your sister smoke weed. I'm like, Dad, that's not funny. And he's like, what do you mean? White people like weed? I'm like, oh my gosh, this is already getting so inappropriate right now. Like, yeah. Oh, my dad's always trying to give me jokes. But they love the fact that I'm doing this, and they're so supportive.
So this show is something that you're working towards doing something larger, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I'm planning to just do one woman show and, like, enter it into festivals and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So, oh, yeah.
So this one, you're looking for feedback from the audience, or are you just working some things out?
Yeah, I'm looking for feedback. I invited some media already to come and do reviews. And yeah, like, there's going to be a lot of friends there, a lot of nurses oh my gosh, there's going to be so many nurses there. so yeah, for sure. For sure. I love feedback.
So it's the best place to be health-wise.
Oh yeah.
Anything
sure.
happens to you,
or they'll be like, I'm not working right now. Like, be in the hospital. But no, yeah, for health-wise, yeah, all the nurses are there.
So this is at the Comedy Bar.
Oh yeah.
And what's the space like? I don't think I've ever been, to be honest.
Oh really? Yeah, it's actually been really popular lately. It's 945 Bloor Street, so it's like Bloor and Ossington-ish. But
Okay.
it's like you kind of go downstairs a little bit, and it's like a huge stage, which I love. There's like 100 seats, but they do a lot of shows through there. Like a lot of comics, international comics, come there and perform like in an intimate space and stuff like that. So it's a really good space.
Okay.
Yeah,
and you're going to be there on July the 6th.
Oh yeah, July the 6th.
And
for sure, one day before my birthday.
I noticed you put that in the notes.
Oh yeah.
Are you looking for presents, Zabrina?
Well, just laughter. Just laughter. That's the best present.
Okay, so just bring your $10. That's Zabrina's present then.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Zabrina, it's always nice to chat with you, and I can't make promises, but I will try and check out your show. Okay.
Oh yeah. If you can make it, that would be amazing.
And thank you so much. I know you've given me a pair of tickets to give away to the listening audience, and I'll be happy to share that with them. Any last words before you go?
Just come Sunday, July 6th, Nurse's Worst Nightmare Comedy Bar. You can reserve tickets at comedybar.ca. So, it's going to be a good time.
Is your dad going to be there?
No, they have to babysit, unfortunately. He would be on stage with me telling the jokes. I don't need that competition.
But Zabrina, you have to use one of his jokes sometime.
Oh God!
Please use one for him.
I know, eh? Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah, Father's Day just passed.
I know. Oh, I have a lot of Father's jokes.
Okay. Looking forward to it. A Nurse's Worst Nightmare at the Comedy Bar on July the 6th. Tickets are $10. Zabrina's given me a pair to give away. So thank you very much, and have a great day, Zabrina.
Oh, great. You too. See you later.
Bye.
All right, bye.
You're listening to The More the Merrier with Donna G. Signing off, actually. Thanks to my guest, James Quandt from TIFF Cinematheque, and Zabrina Chevannes, A Nurse's Worst Nightmare at Comedy Bar. For all of my information, you can go to CIUT.FM, click on The More the Merrier, and you'll find out how to contact me. See you next week. Bye-bye.